Okay, I think I'm going to get us started. I want to be respectful of everybody who is online. So thank you so much for joining. My name is Judy Gadiel, and I'm thrilled to be here with all of you. And thank you to Lisa for the opportunity to present to all of you today. So I am going to start a screen share so you can see a PowerPoint. My colleague Emily Halpern is also online, so she will help with any kind of back end and hopefully will be able to tell me if my sound is off or anything else. So she'll be helping as well. So I want to start one with a quick acknowledgement. When you signed up for this webinar, you may have signed up with expecting Giving Tree Associates. And so just a quick note to share that Giving Tree Associates, for those of you who may not have heard, is winding down its work as a consulting firm. We've been around for 12 years and during this time are winding down our work and will be closing. And the two founders, Amy Schiffman and Stephanie Passisweil, are both moving in a little bit of different directions and starting their own separate consulting firms. My colleague Emily and I are going to be working with Amy Schiffman and have launched Evolve Giving Group. So that is the entity that we are now. That's why you see us listed here as Evolve instead of as Giving Tree. Again, like many of you may have been expecting. So we're very excited. There's more information on our website, which is, we will make sure you have that information. It's evolvegivinggroup.com. And I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that anybody might have about that. But we're very excited to be sharing this with you today. You are our first webinar as the new firm. So yay for us and for all of you. So again, welcome. My name is Judy Gadiel. I'm really happy to be here with you. Just want to also acknowledge it's obviously a kind of crazy time in the world. You know, in terms of obviously the pandemic and now all of the other protests and riots that are going on around the world. So just want to kind of acknowledge that. And again, really appreciate all of your time in taking out and participating with us today. We are going to make sure and we'll send out the PowerPoint and some other materials through Lisa so that you all will have access to this after. So feel free to take notes if you would like, but know that we will send this out to you. And then we have some other materials that we will send along with a worksheet to help you do some development planning. The plan is to talk for a little bit of just about an hour or so, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. And you can also feel free to submit questions via the chat or via the Q&A. Emily will monitor them, and I will also do my best to check them either during or for sure after the conversation. Okay. So I think we are good to go. I would like to start by a very quick poll, if we can, that Emily is going to put up for you. So just so I can get a little bit of a sense of who's on the call. I know Lisa has shared with me that people range from lots of different levels of experience within women in development, but just wanted to get a sense of who's on the call. So hopefully you can see this poll in front of you that has popped up on the screen, just so I can get a sense of what your role is at your organization. So if you take a moment to fill that out, and then I believe that we'll be able to have the results pop back up again in just a moment. Okay, look at that, how fun. So we have one person executive director, about half the group director of development staff, and board member. Great. So it looks like most people on the call, which is what I assume, to kind of have a primary role in development. So again, Lisa shared with me, again, this gives me a good sense of kind of where people are coming from in terms of your roles. And I'm going to jump right in. So today we'll do a couple things. I want to talk a little bit about some of the crisis work that happened at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. I know Amy Schiffman had done a webinar with you guys, I believe, back in March. And so some of it just want to kind of see, this is where you should have been, some of the work that you should have been doing initially around the crisis, and just review a couple of things around that. But really, we're going to spend the bulk of the time talking about moving beyond the crisis. What are the different things that you can be looking at now, and how are you planning for the rest of this fiscal year if you're a July 1 start and then your new fiscal year. So really focusing on kind of moving beyond. What are some of the strategy and planning that you can do? How do we rethink donor engagement? So what were great opportunities to engage our donors before are now look different. And so how do we rethink about those? How do we think about the role of your board members and how to engage your board? Again, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So I want to start by just talking a little bit about there obviously challenging times, and there have been some really, really wonderful what we'll call bright spots or silver linings, right, that have come out of all of these times. So I just want to give a quick moment to talk through a couple of them. And the reason that I chose these is I think that they really show that people are being really creative, that people are being really generous when they're able to, and really figuring out how to work in new and collaborative ways to support each other, to support organizations, to support families and our communities. So I just thought it would be helpful, again, to kind of put some things in perspective and show some real clear examples of some amazing things that have come out of these challenging times. So one of them is a Jewish Community Response Impact Fund, which is something that was created from about 7 different anchor foundations that created this, and it became a $91 million fund that is providing interest-free loans and grants to Jewish organizations, and they're providing both emergency and strategic support. So again, a great example of foundations coming together to pool their resources and determine really what is needed in our communities. So another example of that is the Chicago Community COVID Response Fund. Again, a partnership. This brought together the City of Chicago, the Chicago Community Trust, the United Way, and close to 40 different founding organizations and businesses that came together, a combination of philanthropists, corporations, and individual donors. And this was really targeted at supporting local nonprofit organizations that were helping in the human services field. A little bit of a different example, the Evanston Community Rapid Response Fund, which was something that was supported by some donors, local donors in Evanston, who had contributed $1 million, who had offered to contribute up to $1 million in a challenge grant. I believe it was being managed by the Evanston Community Foundation. Again, to kind of help and support its community. And one more example of this is happening actually in Nashville, Tennessee, so not in Chicago area, but Caring for 615. And this was something that was started by some local business entrepreneurs in Nashville that put up money for about $2 million in grants and in grants for local small business owners and nonprofits, again, in Nashville. This is specifically for organizations or businesses that had less than 25 employees, and they were giving up to $50,000 each. So again, just some examples that people are giving, people are creating new ways to support our communities and our families. And if these are things that potentially you could be available for your organizations, keep those in mind, and just know that there's some really amazing work that's coming out of all of this, which is inspiring. So again, I believe that we are past that initial crisis, but in case there's some pieces that you weren't sure what to do, or just weren't really able to really address some of your donors because you were working on just basically helping your community members that were at your door. Just some things for you to think about. Again, that if you haven't done yet, that you should be making sure to think about doing. So really about taking advantage of the opportunity while people were home, while people continue to be home, and making sure that you're communicating with your donors and letting them know that your work continues. Everybody has obviously a very different situation in terms of financially and what people are able to give or not give. But people's commitment to your work and to your cause, that has not changed. So making sure that you are still out there and communicating with your donors and with your constituents and your stakeholders. Be careful and kind of be steady about how you're responding to people. You want to be sensitive to people's individual situations, obviously. You want to make it clear that you have a plan, even if you're not sure exactly what that plan is going to look like, that you are working towards a plan, that you have some short-term and some long-term goals that you're working on. that you are updating your board members and your leadership constantly and figuring out how can they help. We'll spend some time talking about board and leadership in a little bit. And thinking about your case for support. We'll talk about that a little bit more later as well. But how are you assisting your families? How are you pivoting? How are you changing the work that you're doing to be supportive of your communities? So these are kind of the types of communications that you want to make sure that you're putting out to people, both one-on-one individually, as well as through social media, through e-blast, whatever your kind of primary source of communication is, that you're constantly communicating and letting people know what's going on. You don't want the first time that your stakeholders to hear from you to be about asking for those dollars. Again, a lot of the conversation early on in this crisis was don't be asking and just be letting people know what's going on and building relationships. And now we're moving into that asking phase, but making sure again that you're just continuing to communicate and share with your organization, with your stakeholders, what it is that you're doing. Want to take a moment to talk about institutional funders and foundations. And I think this is really important. Again, if this is something that you have not done yet, you've not had an opportunity to do, now is the time to do that. Institutional funders have been very vocal, many of them, in talking about how they have pivoted and how they're supporting their funders, their grantee organizations. So some of what we've heard is foundations giving extra dollars, emergency funding to their organizations that are in need right now. I've heard many stories of foundations who have lifted their restrictions on their dollars. So whereas a grant might have been directed specifically for a specific program or a specific need, the foundations are saying, you know, you can reuse those, reallocate those dollars towards general operating or whatever needs that you have. So they're changing what they're doing with their restriction of their dollars. Obviously, I've also heard many foundations that are talking about there will be changes in reporting structure, changing in requirements, right? If you had a grant, a programmatic grant that required a certain amount of in-person visits or in-person activity, clearly that has not happened. And the foundations are very aware of that, obviously, and open to relooking at all that. But having communication is really, really important. So making sure that you are both talking to your funders, that you are documenting everything that you are doing that you are not able to do, but the ways that you are pivoting, and that you are letting them know again what it is the work that you're doing and what you anticipate needing right now and coming forward. I have one organization that I work with that has a lot of grant funding. And she felt like she was in a position where she did not need immediate dollars right now, that she was in a good financial position, but anticipated she would be needing them. And she actually returned money from a funder. She got a check unsolicited, unasked for an extra, I think it was $5,000, and felt like she didn't need it right now. And so she wrote back to the foundation and returned those dollars, and said, you know, I'm okay right now, but I might need that later, you know, but share these dollars with people who need them right now. So just be in communication. Funders really appreciate that. They're coming out and saying that that's what they want. They want communication. So again, if you haven't already done that, now is the time to do so. And some lessons interesting, you know, mentioned a Evolve Giving Group is starting right now, kind of in the middle of a crisis time, and Giving Tree Associates itself also started in 2008, so at a time of some crisis in the world financially as well. And so some of the things that really worked for our organizations when we started Giving Tree is really thinking about maintaining your relationships during this time. Who needs some additional conversation? How can your team members do this? How can you engage your board and leadership in reaching out to donors? How can your staff do that? What are they able to do from home? So just thinking about that, trying to get some testimonials from some leaders, from donors, from new people who are engaging your services perhaps in a new way, and trying to build that information so that you can use that later on. So again, all this kind of speaks to the importance that hopefully you have been doing, and if you haven't yet, to make sure that you start communicating with your constituents as you're thinking towards the new year. Okay, I'm going to do a quick pause and just check to see if there's any questions. I think we are good. Okay, great. No open questions. Okay, perfect. So now we've gotten through our initial crisis and we kind of are thinking about what do we do from here? How do we move forward? With our next plan. So one is that I want you to think about what we're talking about here is kind of getting comfortable in the discomfort. So it is time now that you can really start asking your donors for support if you haven't already. And I will assure you that if you are not, know that many, many organizations are. They're having conversations with their large donors. They're having conversations with their mid-range donors. They're starting to have conversations with their lower level donors. So know that other people are having that, and it's okay to be having those conversations in a genuine and transparent way. Again, as I mentioned before, the people that are interested in your work and believe in your missions are continued to be interested in your work and believe in your missions, even if they're not able to support you at the same level. Those missions are still important to them. The people who can help you and can provide dollars right now will continue to do so. And for those who can't, then they can't right now, or they will reduce their gifts. But it is okay for you to be asking, and you may just need to get a little bit more comfortable in how you do that. And hopefully our conversations today will help you to become a little bit more comfortable in that role. So we're going to talk a little bit about campaign planning. And so just a kind of a note here that talks about, right, that it is proven that organizations who have a plan are likely to raise more money than those organizations that do not have one. Having planned, being able to be proactive when you can. We always are acting reactively, right, in nonprofit work. Having worked inside in organizations myself as well as being on the outside and a consultant, I know that we are just day to day, many times trying to survive, especially in situations like this. So when we do have a plan, we can go back to that and try to be more proactive than constantly being reactive, and having some strategy behind our action. You want to also have a fundraising plan so that you can kind of evaluate, right? So what worked in the past, especially in this time, what worked, what didn't work, and how do we need to shift that moving forward to really fulfill and meet our vision? And it's really helpful to have a plan so that you can also have some involvement from your stakeholders, from your board members, from foundations, from other funders who may say, tell me what your plan is. And so you want to make sure that you have one, and so that you can be prepared for whatever is to come. Now is the time, again, to kind of take a couple minutes for you and think about your own plan. Do you have a strategy in place? What tools were you using before that worked for you? Did they work before, but maybe they won't work now? Did they not work before and maybe they will work now, and how does all of that change? So really, this is something that I would encourage you to do offline. We have, as I mentioned in the beginning, we'll be sharing with you an exercise that you can do to help you do some campaign planning, but really, really encourage you to sit down and spend some time in doing that with with and for your organization. So before we get into kind of how do we shift our plan for right now, I want to just make sure that we're all in the same kind of language when we're talking about a plan. Again, for many of you, this is probably something that you have done many times before. For some of you, it may be a newer experience of writing a development plan. So I just want to make sure that we're all kind of using the same language. So I talk about this here kind of as your building blocks, right, of a fundraising plan. You want to make sure that you're thinking about your dollars. You want to make sure you're thinking about your leadership, who is your audience, and what kind of internal systems do you have and internal infrastructure to support your work. If you don't have that infrastructure in place to support it, and now your infrastructure has changed, most likely from being out of our offices and out of where we do our work. So how do we need to rethink kind of what is that infrastructure looking like to support our work? How do we need to rethink how our board members are going to be involved, rethink who our audience is, and rethink about what those goals are? We want our plan to be time limited. So often we talk about doing an annual plan. Maybe right now we're thinking about doing a 6-month plan or a plan for the first 2 quarters. And then we'll need to reevaluate because we're just not sure, there's many uncertainties. We want our goals to be manageable. We don't want to create a plan that is not going to be achievable. Again, and now is an opportunity to reassess what may work and what may not work. We want our plan to have some strategy behind it. So we want to look at some data to be able to support that. So again, what dollars came in last time? How can we use that to predict what may or may not be happening right now? What is kind of the pulse of our community? and some of our members, for those who are member organizations. So we want to be able to have some data to support the plan that we're putting into place. And we want to have very clearly defined roles. I was just on a call earlier this morning with a group doing a strategic plan with them, and talked about the fact that if we don't have people that we can assign for each of these different pieces in the strategic plan, then the plan is just going to sit on the shelf and nothing is going to happen. We want to make sure that we have people in place who are able to carry out these different roles. And if they're not, then it just means we need to reprioritize different. It doesn't mean that there's any judgment around that, but we need to know, do we have people who can do these pieces of our plan? And if not, then we need to reprioritize with what we have and the resources that we have at hand in front of us. I want you to think about, when you're thinking about setting up your plan, your fundraising plan for moving forward. Many of us probably are starting new fiscal years July 1st. So it's a great time to think about where are we ending our year and then moving forward. Some of us are probably in the middle of our fiscal year. So you may want to readjust kind of your last 2 quarters of the year. But I want you to really take some time and understand what your financial position is. What are the dollars that you have on hand that you're able to finish out the year in terms of your budget or to start your year? What do you have? What do you have in reserves, right? So do you have money that you can fall back on that can support you in a time of crisis? What do you have in terms of endowment? I know many organizations that I have worked with who say that if they did not have a strong endowment right now, they would not be able to still have their doors open. So as an aside, this is probably one of the most compelling reasons for those of you who are able to do endowment fundraising and asking for legacy gifts or dollars into a current endowment fund. This is one of the most compelling reasons and opportunities to talk about endowment, is because, again, many organizations, the only reason they are surviving right now is because they do have endowment dollars, which are guaranteeing and protecting a lot of their work right now. So thinking about that, so looking at that, what do you have in terms of endowment dollars that are available to you right now? And what kind of multi-year commitments have your donors made, and are you able to rely on those moving forward? So really just taking stock about what is your financial position now, so that you can, one, respond to donors around that, and then also help you in terms of your budgeting for next year. Or for moving forward. So a couple things to think about in terms of budgeting. Again, as you're looking at what is your budget going to look like for the next fiscal year, is one about your staffing, right? So where are you with your staffing? Did you need to lay off staff? So now is there less dollars that are going towards staff? Do you need to add additional money into your budget to increase hours again? Do you need some interim staffing? Do you need to outsource some of your work to a consultant or somebody else that can help with some new pieces that maybe your current staff can't do? Are you fully staffed, but your staff needs to redirect, and so you need to bring someone else on an interim basis to do some development work or some programmatic work or something else? So really to think about your staffing and what does that look like for moving forward and what changes you need to make. You want to think about your budget in terms of your physical space where your staff works. So if you're bringing people, if you're based in an office or in a center and you're able to bring people back into work over the next month or so, what does that look like? What new expenses are you going to incur because you maybe have to change the layout? I was talking to someone the other day who said her office is like in the center, right, of everything, of all the action, and people are constantly walking back and forth past her desk, right? So is that going to change? Do you need to then be able to, put up some sort of dividers in terms of safety, other supplies that you will need? So what do you need to do physically to your space to be able to have people come in, and what is that budget implications for you? And also, if your staff stays at home and is remote, what does that look like, right? Do you have to supply different types of technology for them? You may be spending less on mileage if that's something that you pay for your staff. So that could be, something to be mindful of. But what else do you need to provide for your staff to be able to work? Also thinking about budget, programmatic expenses for your budget. And what new things do you need to pivot on, or that you have pivoted on, that require different expenses that you had planned? So maybe some things are being less, right? If you're not providing food, let's say at a program for students, but now you need to find other opportunities to engage them. So just thinking about what is your programmatic what are your programs going to look like in your services, and how do you need to adjust the budget for that? And how do you think about lost revenue, both in terms of fee for service as well as in financial, as well as in contributions? Some revenue will likely be lost, and some of those pieces you'll be able to make up for, and some of them you won't. So just to be able to have a realistic conversation with your finance committee, and and among your senior leadership to understand what is that budget going to look like moving forward. And then taking that information and thinking, how do you set your fundraising goal? What I don't want to happen, when I want to caution, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this, which happens often, is the tendency for groups to say, well, here's the deficit, and so let's just increase our fundraising goal to match that deficit. So I want to caution you and help you, empower you to caution the people that you're working with, your board members, to say that's not how it works. And so if we anticipate a deficit, right, then we may need to look at some sort of cuts or some other places to work to kind of massage the budget a little bit, but that doesn't mean that we automatically raise our fundraising goal, right? So again, just kind of, being cautious of that. But some things to think about strategically is, what was the goal last year? What are the new needs that you're anticipating that is going to come out of this year? If you are an organization, a school, for example, or a camp, right, or something like that, or a tuition-based organization, and you can anticipate potentially that you will need that you will have increased demand for financial services, for financial support, scholarship, financial assistance from people. So maybe can you survey your membership and see if that's something that people will need, so that you can start to plan on that. But really trying to dig in and think, what are the new needs that are going to come up that we need to be aware of. What is the feeling around the community, right? So often when we're launching into things like a capital campaign, we do a feasibility study, and we have conversations with people in the community to say, what is the likelihood that you're able to support this and that you're interested in supporting this? So maybe having some informal conversations with some of your donors to say, kind of, where are we? What's the capacity of our community right now? And what are people really wanting to see us do? So that you know what kind of buy-in that you have. Consider if you're in the middle of any kind of major campaign right now, you may need to shift the timing of that. Whether that's a capital campaign, an endowment campaign, you may need to put that off. We work with a lot of organizations who are, right in the middle or at different phases of a campaign. And so needed to take a pause and are ready to jump back into that, but maybe more slowly. So again, thinking about how is that going to affect what your goal is going to be for fundraising for your year. And trying to look at, and some based on the finances too. So really listing out your donors. Who do you anticipate you'll be able to continue as a donor? Who will potentially upgrade? Any new donors that will emerge for you? And where do you think that those dollars are going to be lost? And that you will not be able to recoup those. So really kind of taking all of that into consideration, and trying to come up with a fundraising goal. Okay. Wonderful. I feel like I should be pausing to kind of check in. I'm just going to do a very quick look. I think we're still doing okay. Yeah, I think we're good. Okay. So, I skipped one. Oops, give me 1 second. Okay, so we want to think about who we're talking about when we're talking about our donors. And I think the important thing here to think about, has anybody re-emerged for you that are new prospective donors? So we have an organization that actually Emily and I work with together. They're a community center. And because of them having to pivot so many of their services, they're a community center or a health club. And because they had to pivot and put so many of their services online, it opened up their activities to so many more people and prospective people who are engaging with their work in a different way. So they do exercise classes, and they do classes for seniors. And so by able to have that stuff online, again, they have people who are engaging with them for the first time, who have maybe not engaged with them for years, or who are brand new. So when you're thinking about who your target markets are for your fundraising moving into your new year, you have kind of all of your do regular buckets that hopefully this, these here touch on, but really think about who are the new people that have emerged, that you can now start to build relationships with, who you may not have been able to connect with before, but have emerged. Are there alumni that have come back because they really see what you're doing, or they've been able to be engaged in your work, with students? Are there former board members who have come back and reconnected with you? So again, try to expand who you're thinking about in terms of your target market. Excuse me. And then I think you really want to spend some time thinking about how and rethinking that how. Right. So again, what worked for you in the past may or may not work again for you right now. And that's what I really want you to take out of this, is to thinking about what does that look like. If you're an organization that has a lot of foundations or institutional funders, or you're looking to grow that, you really need to think about what is that going to look like right now. Many foundations we talked about are kind of giving additional dollars to their current grantees, or they're creating new opportunities for people who are really, in the frontline work, or in really crisis work and or real like human service needs. If that's not you, now might not be a time to be doing research for new funders, because you may not be able to attract a new funder for the first time. But maybe it's an opportunity to just further enhance the work that you have with your current funders, to look for collaborations that they might be interested in supporting. And to start building relationships. But again, probably not a time that you'll be able to find new funders to fund you for the first time if you're not doing really what I consider kind of like frontline work. Thinking about your major gifts and your individual face-to-face giving. We're not at a place right now that we're taking donors out for lunch, or that we're having, under cultivation stewardship, we're not having stewardship events. We're not having donor recognition events in person. So how can we rethink of that? What do we need to be doing? What are the new things that we can do? I've just heard many clients who are having conversations on Zoom, right, with some of their donors, or are really able to take advantage of the fact that they're at home and their donors are home, to be having more personal conversations. I've heard donors talk about the fact that being able to be in a Zoom call and a group call, or kind of a group gathering, right, online, gives them such a different sense of personal connection with the executive director or a board chair, because they feel like there's a more intimacy because you're face to face on a screen, right, and not looking at somebody across the room. So just thinking about how do we want to really interact with our individual donors, the ones that we would be interacting with face to face. Thinking about direct response. If you're an organization that does a lot of direct mail, that's something that you might need to rethink, right? That might be something that was successful for you, but you may not be able to really get into your office and do a lot of printing. The post office is having challenges. Our printers might not be working. Hopefully they're getting back to work soon. But so you may need to think about, how are you reaching out? What is your broad-based fundraising looking like? Are there new avenues versus online that you can think about using if you haven't used those yet? Now is the time. And maybe now is a great time, again, to be really talking to people via phone, whereas we weren't doing that for a while. Of course, part of that depends on, the information that you have in terms of your stakeholders. Do you have phone numbers? Do you have email addresses? Maybe you're sending an email and asking them for their phone number so you can reach out via phone. So again, just kind of rethinking how you're reaching out to people, and what those plans are looking like is really important. Again, and thinking about making sure that you have the people lined up to do that on your team, whether that's your board or your staff, and that people have the resources and the information that they need. So back a couple minutes ago, when we talked about what is your financial picture, right? And making sure that anybody who's reaching out to your major donors has that information in front of them, and can easily access that so they can respond to donors and have the information that their donors need. I want to talk a little bit about events. Our consultants have spent a lot of time working with clients on events. I'm in the middle of one right now and talking to a couple other ones about their events. So we're kind of beyond the point of the spring event season where the question was, do we have the event or do we cancel the event? So we're kind of beyond that part, and I'm sure many of you canceled and many of you created virtual events. And many of you probably did different things. But when we're thinking about now moving forward, when we still don't know what that's going to look like, we don't know if we'll be able to do in-person gatherings in the fall, in the winter. We're just not sure of that. So it's really an opportunity to think about your event. And I would ask yourself a couple of questions. So what is the goal of the event? And are there other ways that can be achieved? I would ask you to think about, how has your audience changed, right? So working with one organization right now who's thinking about what to do with their event, and they have typically, it's a fall event, and it's a young adult event that typically happens at a bar, and with music, and a very kind of social event, right? And so now, if that's not available and they're thinking about what else do they want to do, they have an opportunity to reach beyond that audience. That particular audience that comes to that event are not people that are really connected to the mission of the organization, but they're there because of a friend asked them, and they're there for the night on the town, right? So if you're not offering that night on the town, who is it that you really want to engage, and what is that opportunity? Is it an opportunity to bring back, this is for a school, right? So is it an opportunity to bring back some alumni, and talk to them and see and engage them in a different way? Is an opportunity to reach beyond your circle of who your current donors are. So really thinking about, who is the audience that you want to now reach, again, and are there other ways that you can do that? You want to think about recapturing the net, right? So if you were spending, if you were netting $100,000 from your event, or you were grossing $100,000 from your event, but you don't need to spend 40, 50,000 of that in expenses, then you're able, now all of a sudden you have a much more manageable goal that you're trying to reach, because you don't have all of those expenses. You will have some expenses, but you will not have the same expenses as it was if it was an in-person event. So you have that opportunity now to think about, really, what are those dollars, and how can I recapture that? I always strongly recommend that we think about these events moving forward, not as the fundraising event itself, because we just don't know what that's going to look like. If we do plan in person, we don't know if that will be able to happen. If we plan virtually, you don't know how many people are going to sign up that night of. So I really encourage that any kind of event that you do, that you focus on as much of the fundraising in advance of that particular event as you can, so that anything going into that night is really kind of your gravy, and going in that you hopefully have achieved your dollars in advance. So again, if that's what's happening, then the goal of the evening, or the event itself, maybe is not fundraising, and maybe the goal is engagement. And so think about, how else can we achieve those goals? Are we doing smaller things? Are we doing a virtual event? Are we doing parlor meetings? So again, really an opportunity to think about, as you're planning for your next year, how you want to think about your events. Okay, wonderful. Want to spend some time making sure that you think about, what is your new case for support, right? What case for giving, case for support, case for need, however you want to frame that. But that's really important for you to spend some time. I would spend some time with your board around this, as well as with your staff, as well as with, as a leadership team, but really thinking about, what is your case? What has your vision at all changed? Hopefully your vision is not changed, but has your mission at all changed or altered? Are we still all in agreement that this is the important things that we should be working on? And then how are we communicating that to our stakeholders, to our donors, and how are we reframing what we need? And how has that shifted from where we were, 6 months ago, a year ago? And you may want to think about that. What do you need to do if your end of the year is coming up now? Is there anything that you need to do as a final push for dollars to end your fiscal year? Again, if you're in the middle of the year and you're thinking about how do you want to tell your story for the next couple months, but really thinking about that, again, maybe in two different pieces. I think right now is a really compelling time to be talking about general operating dollars, because our programs have changed, because we don't know what those are going to look like. The again, very compelling to think about. Here's where our dollars are needed most, is where we can have the most flexibility possible with those dollars. And so to the extent that you're able to talk about that with your, in your story and with your donors, is going to be really, really important to you. Being able to share how you responded to the crisis. How did you pivot? What were you able to do to still serve your community, and sometimes in new and exciting ways than you have done before? How will you continue to do that, and what will that need? And and how can the donor help, right? This is a time, again, where there are many people are feeling that they want to be helping and not sure how to do that. And so this is an opportunity for you to, as I say, kind of make your donor your hero, right? And how can they help you, and how can they help save the work that you're doing, and the work and really your communities that you're supporting. Again, and being very unapologetic in the ask. For those people who are able to give, many of them are excited and want to have that opportunity to give. And for those who cannot give or have to change their level of support, then that's where they are too. I feel like people are having much more open conversations around those types of things, those types of conversations these days, around how people are doing mentally and emotionally and financially. There seems to be kind of a lifting of a veil that is allowing those conversations to happen in a different way. And so have those conversations and just engage in that. But really try to frame and understand, what is your case for giving, and how has that shifted, and what is that going to look like, to the extent that you know that. And then your other communications as well. So that was talking about really in terms of the donor communications, but in general, how are you telling the story of your work? And how are you framing that in all of your communications in terms of the opportunities that you have found versus the struggles, and really about the impact and these beautiful stories that are emerging of people being engaged in new ways than they have before, and really finding such extreme value in the work that we're doing, all of us as nonprofit professionals. So really trying to capture those stories and share those in all of your communications. So I want to take a minute to just think about, again, how we have to change and pivot in terms of the work that we're doing with our donors and how we're engaging our donors. So we talked about who our donors might be and expanding potentially that and rethinking that. We've talked about what it is that we're doing. What are those activities that we're engaging with to raise dollars? And we need to rethink also, how are we stewarding and how are we recognizing our donors? So when I talk about it, cultivation to me is, as you're learning about a person and building a relationship and teaching them about your organization. Once they make a gift, then you're working to steward that relationship, to continue that relationship. And so this is just a sample of a chart that you may have, or something like this for your organization, that thinks about how are we, again, recognizing, stewarding, continuing to strengthen relationships with our donors and helping to raise them from one giving level to another. If you don't have something like this, I suggest that you sit down and try to think about these opportunities, and we'll send you some samples as well as our materials. But in this sample, right, so we're talking about different ways that we're stewarding our donors, and one of them, very typical, is to be recognizing our donors at our annual dinners, or even potentially giving them additional tickets, or holding VIP events for our donors before our events. Right, those are things that are likely not going to happen next year. So really think about, how can we now create different opportunities that we can recognize our donors, and what is that going to look like? So if we can't invite them to a dinner, excuse me, what can we do? Can we hold a Zoom VIP breakout group, right? Does that make sense? Are we able to offer more personalized connection with our executive director, or our board chair, or participants in our programs, that we can show our donors more of an inside look? We do some work with the Chicago Children's Choir in Chicago, and they did a wonderful performance that they typically do in person at Millennium Park, and they did the whole thing online. And they had very, really nice opportunities for donors to come in and to share messages. They brought a lot of, I'm not articulating this very well, but they brought a lot of guest speakers kind of to come in and talk about this, and just different ways that you could connect with people as a donor that would not have been available before. So just, again, the invitation to really rethink how you want to connect with your donors, and what kind of opportunities can you provide for them in new ways. You also want to make sure, in addition to just that calendar, I'm going to go back for 1 second, that if you have individual plans for each of your donors or your prospects, that you may need to tweak those too. And you likely need to tweak your entire development calendar. Again, we'll share a sample with you so you can see what that looks like. But if you're mapping out your year and kind of what are all your different activities, that's something that you're going to want to look at really differently this year as well. And you really want to think about, as we said, to make sure who are doing these different pieces within your organization. What are your board members able to do? What committees do you have that you might need to shift? And what does your staffing look like that you might need to shift? You might need to add some additional staff. If your staff members are focused on other things and not able to work on the development or communications pieces, those are things that you may need to relook at and make sure that you understand people's capabilities. This is a great opportunity to reach out to your staff and just connect with them as well as your board members. So I'm going to take a couple minutes and just talk about kind of the role of your board for a nonprofit and how that may look differently right now. And I think what I want to emphasize is that the roles don't change. The needs of your organization from a governance perspective, which is really about your fundraising, your fiscal oversight, your visioning, your supporting the CEO, your building relationships, right? These are pieces of your board, their responsibilities that do not change. But what might very well change is who is able to do these functions and how is that going to happen. So this is a really, really good time for you to reach out to each of your board members. Perhaps you can use your governance committee to help you do that. Or perhaps, in your role, that's something that you can do or that you can coach and work with your executive director to do, or whoever is your board liaison. But it's a great opportunity. Again, many of us, our fiscal years are ending now, or we're planning for the new year. And what do your board members want to be doing? What are they able to do? Right? So someone who was a chair of a committee before, maybe in a very different situation right now, and they're not able to continue to chair that committee. But you want to be able to have those intentional conversations up front with your board members and understand where they are. Some of them who played a much smaller role or were not able to be engaged before, maybe they have a lot of space and time that's opening up and they're able to take on more of a leadership role. So really to think about, again, having these conversations with each of your members and what is their availability to continue to serve, and what is their availability to continue to support you financially. Again, for some people that won't have changed, for many people that will change. And so being able to have that conversation up front so you could do some planning, and so that you can just open the doors for open and honest communication with your leaders. This is also an opportunity where there may be new leaders who have emerged. So volunteers who are peripherally involved, who have stepped up right now because they have time and space to devote to you. And so really start thinking about who are we seeing similar in terms of the prospective donors, who are we seeing emerging in different leadership roles that now might be a good time to engage them in a more formal role on our board. This may be an opportunity also where you need to think about adding some additional committees to your board to get you through the year, right? So we work with a lot of synagogues, and they are right now all having to rethink how do we produce, right, our holidays, our services for our high holidays coming up in the fall. So many of them are having special ad hoc committees that are forming of their board to think about this. This is obviously a very big piece of Jewish cultural and religious life is the high holidays. And so how do we think about that? And so what are the pieces of your program or of your fundraising or of other parts of your organization that the board really can step up in? And again, might need to create a little bit of a different organizational structure or a new committee to address some of these things. So again, the big message here is about having communication, understanding what people are able to do, because these functions of the board, right, that still are functions that absolutely need to happen so that your organization can continue to grow and thrive and make it through all these transitions and plan for your successful year. In general, your board members, you want them to be that ambassador for you. You want them to be able to reframe the case and talk about that. So making sure that they have the information that they need to be able to do that, making sure that they can share their stories, that they're checking in with their congregants or your members or anybody else. So making sure they have some information on hand, and how can they really be an ambassador for you by telling your story, sharing those stories, and connecting with people. The board's role is important in making sure that you have have that funding. So again, do we need to be cutting expenses? Do we need to be shifting our programming? Do we need to be identifying new prospective donors or asking in a different way? But that is a primary function of the role of the board that has not changed right now. And for them to have a really big part in helping you with the strategy piece. What do we need to do differently moving forward? What things do we need to keep the same? So again, we talked about the plan. So engaging them, your board members, your executive committee, and updating your plan. Thinking about the timing. Do we want to do a 6-month plan and then reevaluate? The budget we talked about, really looking at what that budget is going to look like, and getting input from as many people as possible. Can we survey some of our members? Can we really talk to our building committee and see what needs to happen in the building? Is this a time, right, that we're not using the building, so we have less use? I have one organization I work with who, because they haven't been in the building, there's no staff in the building and just some maintenance people are in the building, they've kind of uncovered some things that really have not been attended to that now they have to attend to. So what's going on in your facility as well that might need some thought. So really engaging your board in these ways is super important. One thing I want to talk about real quickly is just in terms of your resources, right? So you want to make sure also all of this work is super, super important. And if you don't have systems in place and the infrastructure in place, it is really hard to continue to maintain all of this. So there's some changes that you will likely need to make. Some of these you probably have already. To your infrastructure moving forward. So you want to look at your acknowledgement letters, both in terms of the language that you're using, as well as how are you delivering those letters. So if you were sending print letters to all of your donors, you may not have been able to do that during this time. Maybe you'll be able to do that moving forward. If you're back in the office, maybe it's a time where you want to start shifting to sending letters via email or doing phone calls to thank, but people still want to have a tax letter. So making sure that you're thinking about how are we doing these. If you haven't been able to and it has just kind of fallen by the wayside, now is the time to go back and look to see who didn't get a thank you letter and acknowledgement over the past couple of months that needs to, and make sure that you pick that back up again. But checking the language of how you're communicating in those acknowledgements, and then what is that process of how you're sending it. Again, are you wanting to do that via print? Does that still make sense for you as an organization, or can you switch to electronic? And if you switch to electronic, do you have the email addresses that you need from your donors, or do you need to reach out to them and get their information so you can send it a different way? Hopefully, all of us have their data on a web-based database so that you're able to access that at home and that your staff is able to use that at home. If not, now is the time where you might want to look at that. There's many, many options that are not a huge cost financially, but making sure that whoever needs that database has access to it, no matter where they're working, and that they are continuing to look at your information and maintain the integrity of your data. It's a great time for many if they are less busy, although I'm not really sure who is less busy in our world, but if there's some who are, it could be a good time to switch over to a different database or really do some cleanup, especially as you may be gathering new information or different information from your donors. And you want to think to make sure that you're processing your contributions that are coming in. If there's checks that are coming to your office, what does that system look like? Are you able to get those? Are you able to deposit them? Do you need to switch to a different system with your banking or whatever the process is for that? But really thinking about what does that look like right now? What did that look like? What does it look like now? And what makes sense for you moving forward into the new year about how you want to do that? And are the institutions that you're banking with changing their system? So it might be a good time to check in with them about that as well. So again, just to say really to make sure that you have the infrastructure to support the important work that you're doing, because that's super important so that you could do that work, and you don't want things to fall apart because you don't have the infrastructure in place to support that. So what can you do now? A couple quick things for you to do, kind of as immediate next steps. I would really sit down and kind of make yourself a simple to-do list. What are the top 3 things that I need to get done, by the end of, by the end of the week, by the end of the day, however you want to break that down, by the end of the month, but make yourself some kind of simple to-do list so that you can get through the things that you need to do. I would pick your top 3 to 5 donors and call them if you have not already, or if you have, but this is just a recheck in. Make sure that you're continuing to make those phone calls and reach out to your donors. I would schedule an executive committee meeting with your board. If you haven't met with them in a while, or you're not quite sure what to do with them, now is the time to schedule the meeting with them, work on some of this planning, thinking about your budget really strategically, thinking of the things that we talked about in terms of budget considerations. And get those conversations going and understanding how can they help you reach out to your board members, all of the board members, to have those one-on-one conversations. And I would take some time with your team or by yourself to sit down and fill out the development planning worksheet that we will send to you. It's a really nice tool that helps break down some very specific things for you and helping your planning. So those are just a couple of things that you can do right now to get yourself started. And we have many resources on our website. So again, our website is now at evolvegiving.com. And we hope that you access those resources. There's all the webinars that Giving Tree Associates has done basically since the beginning of March. I think we've done probably 8 or 10 or so webinars to different groups. So there's some really pertinent information for you. There's some sample materials and language to use with donors. There's a lot of information around events. And we also, as Evolve Giving Group, are open to doing some complimentary coaching with any of you. So you can email me here. My phone number is there, but we would love to be able to sit down with you if you have questions, things that you just need some help thinking about. We've been doing a lot of coaching. We always do coaching, but we've been doing a lot more specifically over the past couple of months. And it's really, it's wonderful for us to have the opportunity to hear what people are doing and to be able to give some concrete support and suggestions to organizations. So please feel free to reach out if you would like them. We're doing 30-minute sessions. And we will make sure, again, that you have all this information that we will send to you, as well as those samples. And I am like right on time, which is amazing. So thank you all. I'm going to stop sharing so that I can check out the chats and the questions. So let me look. It looks like Emily put our resources in the chat. So there's a link right to our website right there. Okay, so I have a couple questions. I'm going to read them and we'll go from there. So this question said, wondering about canceling a September golf outing, although the shelter in home will most likely be lifted. Feeling it is not okay to host an event with 100 in a room for lunch, people you don't know in a golf cart, back in for cocktail hour. Is it okay to cancel and give an explanation? It says we're concerned for their safety. It feels like canceling sounds like a cop-out. Great question. So I think there's a couple things to think about. One is in terms of what we don't know what's going to happen, right, in terms of what the shelter in place will look like. Now, given the fact that we have many, many more people that are out gathering more quickly than we had anticipated with all of the protesting that's going on. Even all the peaceful protesting has a lot of people in small paces, as well as cities starting to open up. So we don't know what that's going to look like in terms of a backlash from COVID. Hopefully not very much. But there's one thing in terms of what is opening up, and the other, I think, is people's comfort levels. And so, again, I think thinking about being outside playing golf is one thing when you talk about, right, being in golf carts with people, coming inside for lunch, back out for a cocktail hour. There's a lot of different transitions. And my sense is that that's going to be very, very challenging to be able to pull off in person. So I don't feel like it's a cop-out at all. I think that it's being thoughtful, it's being respectful, it's being planful. And what I would hate to see is that you spend the next 2 months really, we all know how much time and resources it takes to plan an event. So I would hate to see you spending that time over the next 2 months, really digging in, using your staff resources, your staff time, your money to plan an event, then you can't happen that will cancel. I would rather see you spend that time having individual conversations with your donors, thinking again, as we talked about, what is the goal of that event, and how can you recreate that experience in a different way. So maybe you can't have 100 people at a golf course, but can you have, smaller gatherings? Can you have a parlor meeting? Do you have somebody who would be willing to host maybe at an office space or in a restaurant, or outside, in a tent, right? Like if you have a donor who has a space that they can put up a tent or something and do smaller gatherings of people. So I think I would think about what are the different ways that you can engage this group. But I absolutely think that that's okay to cancel. And I think that it would be very challenging, even if the world is open up enough for you to do that, that there will be many, many people who will not feel comfortable going. And you don't want to push them away or have them not have an opportunity to attend. Okay, so somebody asked, what kind of language updates for acknowledgement letters do you suggest? Great. So it's a couple of things. So one I would say is that you want to be able to share with them some of your current case for support language. So in general, we recommend that you revisit and look at your acknowledgement letters at least once a year, so that if you have new language to talk about, if you have new branding, something like that, that you can share that. We tend to get stuck in the same thing of just the same language over and over, but it really is another opportunity as a touch point for donors. So many times people are really just looking for that acknowledgement. Thank you for the gift and here's your tax information, but it is an opportunity to share something. So maybe you can share a story, maybe you can share a quote, maybe you can put a picture in there of something that you have done differently. If you're going to be sending acknowledgements out, if this is something that you're sending in print, but moving forward, you're going to be sending acknowledgements via email, you may want to let them know that. You may want to ask them, for that information, for their email address, to be able to send that back to you, or for you to be able to reach out to them and get that. So I think just thinking about what is kind of the mission focused, anything that you can share with them, and then is there any kind of logistical or information that you want to share with them about your process? Next question. I have a question about asking for mid-level stretch gifts. It feels awkward asking over the phone with people I haven't met but have had contact with. They've been agency supporters, so the giving history is there. Do you recommend making the call and ask for COVID gifts? Send a letter first explaining that I'd like to call and discuss a gift. Great. So great question. So again, I think it's about one is an opportunity, right? So if there's people that you have not had an opportunity to connect with in person, this may be a nice opportunity to do that. I think absolutely you can send an email or a letter first and say that this, and explain a little bit about what's going on with the organization and let them know that you will be reaching out. I think that's a nice way to kind of let people know it's coming so they can predict that and be and not be surprised by the call. So I think that makes a lot of sense, again, as a way to kind of just let them know what's happening. We're going to be reaching out. I would like to have a conversation with you and share more information that I'm able to share via email or via letter, and let them know. I think the question around asking for a COVID gift specifically, I would say really depends on what your mission is. I don't think it's always appropriate for organizations to have an emergency COVID response if that's not something that they need, right? And so again, that goes back to really looking at what is your financial situation right now. What do you need right now? What do you anticipate needing, 6 months from now or a year from now? And so maybe you want to wait and hold that ask until that there's a time that you really do need it. If you're able to do that right now. So I would really think about what are the needs right now and what are the anticipated needs. But I don't know that it's always appropriate to say we need a COVID emergency gift. Although many organizations do need to set up an emergency fund for that as well, of course. So if that is your situation, then that would be appropriate to ask for that. Okay, any other questions? I don't see any other questions. So maybe that means I did such a great job that people don't have other things to ask. I think that is all of them. I'll give kind of another couple minutes to just see if anyone has more questions. And again, I really, really appreciate the fact of everybody joining on and being a part of this, and spending your time. I know there's many ways to be spending time right now, so we really appreciate you coming on and spending this time with us. I'm just looking again. Okay, so 2 more questions. Can you talk more about engaging the board in fundraising? And currently my fundraising committee is not mobilized. They need direction. So in terms of engaging the board in fundraising, again, I really feel like having conversations with people individually is super important. It's time consuming. It will take your time. Board members are in very different places right now. But I think the more that you can have some individual conversations with them is really, really important to understand where they are, what they're able to do. Many people want to do something, but maybe can't keep the same commitment that they needed to. So I think that's really important to have conversations. I think also having an opportunity to kind of re-talk about your vision and your mission, and your why, like understanding your why is really important. And that may have changed and people's priorities may have changed because of just whatever their personal situation is and everything that they are experiencing. So kind of revisiting that as a group, as a board, is why are we here? Why do we exist? And why do we continue to remain relevant? And I think people reconnecting with that in this time is something that can be really powerful for people. And so once they kind of reconnect and recommit and have agreed, yes, this is something that's important to me, and I do have some space to spend some time, let's talk about what we need. And in order for us to survive as an organization, here's really what we need to do. But I think bringing people back to that why is really important, as opposed to focusing specifically on the what and the how, but really engaging them in some of those, heartfelt conversations. And why are we important in the space of the world right now? And then I think once people are kind of engaged in that, then really people need some specific information. They need some specific roles, and they need to know how to do that. So do you need to provide them some more training? Do they need some one-on-one coaching? What information do they need to be successful? And I ask that question of board members all the time. How can we help you be successful? What is it that you need? So again, kind of bringing them, having one-on-one conversations to see where they are, bringing them as a group back to kind of the why do we exist? Why do we do this work? And then what do we need in order to help our organization survive and thrive, and then have very specific roles and functions for people to do, I think is a lot more helpful than saying, here's our fundraising, go at it. But if you could say, here's 5 people for you to call right now, that wobe really helpful for you to call and really impactful, and people could have positive experiences having those phone calls. I think goes a long way in helping people be engaged. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I don't see any more coming in. So again, I will just, Lisa, unless there's anything else, I think we will. I don't want to leave people on if there's no other questions. So thank you all again so much for the work that you do and for participating in this call. Please feel free to reach out if you have questions. If you want to take advantage of some free coaching with us at Evolve Giving Group. And I really just, hope everyone takes good care of themselves and their communities. And we look forward to continuing to connect at some time in the future. Okay, I think we are going to shut down. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.